Peace, peace. It's your good sister Morgan Renee Myers tuning in with another story time with Morama. We are in the book For Freedom's Sake, The Life of Fannie Hamer by Chana Lee. I'm currently recording on my Instagram and Facebook, which will be uploaded to my YouTube. I started this book a few years ago. This is 2024 when I'm recording this. I probably started it in 2022, and I found those old videos and downloaded them and have since uploaded them to my YouTube. So if you go on my YouTube, it's Morgan Myers, Myers, or Storytime with Morema, Moremy. You will see a playlist, and you'll see I have uploaded all those readings. So I picked up the last reading chapter 5, part 2, the remainder of that. So now, new year, new energy, we're going to finish this book, and we are in chapter 6. So you'll have to catch up on some of the terminology and things that's been going on in Fannie Lou's life, because I'm not about to give a recap in this video, because I got to go back and watch some of those videos, because I haven't gone back and reread those chapters myself. So here we go. Chapter 6, For Freedom's Sake, The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer by Chana Lee. It starts off with a quote by Fannie Lou Hamer that says, "Today I don't have any money, but I'm freer than the average white American because I know who I am." Let's pause there for a minute. If you have not already, at some point in this day, you've already waken up, that's a blessing. Drink some water, hydrate your body, give thanks. Give thanks as soon as you wake up. Wake up, give thanks, drink water, stretch, pray, meditate, write some goals, say some affirmations, wash up, get ready, give you time for you before you start your day. It's so imperative. It works wonders for the soul. And by doing that, some of these answers to these questions, because life is a lot. Life got a lot going on. But the more you can tune in, get some deep breaths, focus on you, you'll get some of these answers. Fannie said, "Today I don't have any money, but I'm freer than the average white American because I know who I am." Money is nothing but energy. It's paper. It's not the end-all, be-all. What we're here for, our spirits housing these bodies, our souls housing these vessels. What is the purpose that we are put here to do? Because it ain't to be chasing money. And she lived a hard life, being a civil rights activist and just fighting for her basic human rights to live and survive and thrive as a person, let alone a black person. So money ain't doing nothing for her, but she was still able to be taken care of, looked out for, in a sense, while going through all these traumas and tragedies. So let's get into it. Returning home. In fall 1964, Hamer accompanied a SNCC delegation to West Africa at the invitation of Guinea's President Sékou Touré. Coming on the heels of the disappointing defeat in Atlantic City, the trip was like a balm to Hamer's wounded and dismayed soul. The visit fed her emotional reserve and deepened her commitment to political change. They say Africa do that to you. The visitor stayed a little less than 3 weeks, but during that brief time, Hamer collected a lifetime of experiences that led her to reflect on the meaning of blackness. She discovered her African roots and began to feel a sense of racial pride that seemed to match, if not exceed, altogether. The more personal pride instilled in her by a strong mother and an interpretation of Christianity that valorized self-love almost as much as love of God. She observed black people running their own government and businesses. Undoubtedly, this was a dramatic expansion of horizons for a woman born a sharecropper. As she observed life in Guinea, Hamer, always a quick and intelligent thinker, began analyzing the negative racial stereotypes she had been taught about Africa. In Africa, she saw strong, independent black people appearing to lead lives of free white oppression, and largely because of their own efforts. Her impressions of the Guineans made her think of her own family and her own relation to history. Moreover, the trip confirmed the necessity of struggle if oppressed people were to be free. It linked her to a worldwide movement and community, as it did for all members of SNCC's delegation and other African-American leaders, most notably Malcolm X, whose own internationalization paralleled Hamer's in 1964. She began to make connections and arrive at a deeper understanding of the cultural, psychological consequences of oppression. The trip that Hamer, the trip left Hamer more contemptuous of American racism than ever, yet also more hopeful of her own ability to effect change and to realize a world where blacks will be able to live decent lives. Most significant, the good feelings generated during the Africa trip made victory seem possible again. The idea of a SNCC trip to West Africa was proposed by the world-famous singer and civil rights supporter Harry Belafonte during one of his visits to Greenwood, Mississippi. Belafonte had received an invitation from Sekou Touré, who wanted a group of black American youth activists to come to his country and share ideas about struggle with young Guineans. Belafonte and other famous personalities secured donations and paid for the trip. Many people wanted to go on this first trip, which became the source of more fighting within SNCC. SNCC staff selected Hamer to go because they wanted to honor her many personal sacrifices made for the movement. Hamer was joined by John Lewis, Donna and Bob Moses, Julian Bond, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, Donald Harris, William Hanson, Prathia Hall, Matthew Jones, and James Foreman. On September 11th, the activists left New York City on a Pan-American flight to Dakar. Lewis described the long journey as a family outing with people roaming the aisles, laughing and eating and drinking. You could feel everyone letting go and relaxing almost immediately. In Senegal, the delegation was met by a small group holding greeting signs, "Welcome SNCC to Senegal." During a reception, the activists and their Senegalese host drank banana juice and honored the moment with a toast, "Uhuru," freedom. They saluted. From Dakar, the SNCC delegation boarded an Air Guinea plane for southward travel to their final destination. When the visitors arrived in Guinea, the Touré government placed them in comfortable living quarters and gave them 2 cars for their own use. James Foreman described the group as filled with a profound and very memorable sense of well-being throughout its stay. The big thrill for many of them came from giving Hamer a chance to see a world outside her home state. During the visit, President Touré dropped by the group's quarters occasionally to see how the delegation members were faring. Overwhelmed and deeply impressed by his visits, Hamer observed, "Imagine the president coming to see us, when in the United States we couldn't even go to see the president." Long after she left, Hamer talked about the psychological value of such a trip. In his 1972 memoir, James Foreman wrote, "Today, Mrs. Hamer still talks about the importance of black people from the United States visiting black countries where blacks run the government, industry, everything." The impressive nature of the trip had as much to do with Guinea's own history as with the history of the African American visitors. Guinea was the second African nation to gain independence from a European power in 1958, so only a few years before this civil rights movement. This is 1964, I think. Wow. It had been a colony of France, and when given the choice of continuing such a relationship or becoming independent, the people of Guinea chose independence. The stories are legendary about the manner in which the French cut ties with their former colony. Tales abound about how the French took everything with them, including the telephones. Guinea literally had to start from scratch as a nation. In doing so, it declared itself a socialist nation, and its leaders pulled the nation together by espousing the value of a strong sense of African history and culture. Moreover, they stressed realizing independence through sound organization and clear political consciousness at every level in society, from leaders and followers. As the SNCC delegation visited Guinea, it witnessed a recently liberated black nation in the process of rebuilding itself after years of colonial subjugation. On October 2nd, Guinea's Independence Day, the group attended the opening of a new stadium. The delegates also visited a match factory and a printing plant after the assassinated Congo leader Patrice Lumumba. Throughout their stay, they read the newspapers and commented on the impressive amount of detailed focus on African news. Let me make a quick note, because I've heard about Patrice Lumumba, but I ain't even going to hold you like I know his whole story, because I don't. So let me make sure I'm writing his name down right. So I'll do my personal research on the side. Yeah, I like to look up words, write down names, sometimes mark, highlight in the book. Yeah. Throughout their stay, they read the newspapers and commented on the impressive amount of detail focused on African news, not French or European affairs, as it should be. If we living in this country together, we neighbors, we commune, life should be a flow. It should be at ease. We should be bartering, networking, and investing in one another. We should be talking about our news, our businesses, our events coming up. What else is there to talk about? Putting on everybody else except the people right in your family, your neighborhood, your community. Come on now. Throughout their stay, they read the newspapers and commented on the impressive amount of detail focused on African news, not French or European affairs. In addition to the Independence Day celebration, the delegation got a feel for interaction. Let me write that down too. October 2nd is Guinea's Independence Day. Because I want to look this up. October 2nd, Guinea's Independence Day, and that was, 1958? So they was newly liberated themselves. In addition to the Independence Day celebration, the delegation got a feel for interaction between culture and politics through the nationally celebrated cultural competitions that were held during their visit. When it was not out observing and participating in aspects of Guinean life, the delegation spent time relaxing and reading socialist literature. In addition, members of the delegation had several discussions with President Touré. He imparted a great deal of advice to the group, mostly about leadership and organization. He noted that strong leadership was a must in any effort to liberate a community or a nation of people. He talked about the necessity for criticism and self-criticism within organizations, so important. He reminded them, as Foreman wrote, of the need for people to examine the good and bad aspects of not only the party section leaders but officials all the way to the top. The president, he maintained, must be criticized by the base, and the base must have the strength to do it. This was certainly not lost with the forthright Hamer. President Touré also asked the delegation about its struggle back in the United States. Hold on, let me highlight that. Okay, sorry, y'all. He reminded them, as Foreman wrote, of the need for people to examine the good and bad aspects of not only the party section leaders but officials all the way to the top. The president, he maintained, must be criticized by the base, and the base must have the strength to do it. This was certainly not lost on the forthright Hamer. President Touré also asked the delegation about his struggle back in the United States, continually emphasizing political consciousness, good organization, and correct analysis. Moreover, as he listened to SNCC members, he reminded them that the problem was one of exploitation, especially economic exploitation. The trip bolstered... let's talk about it. When you're economically exploited, you can only fight, but it's so hard. The trip bolstered Hamer's self-concept as a black woman. In her autobiography, she noted, being from the South, we never was taught much about our African heritage. The way everybody talked to us, everybody in Africa was savages and really stupid people. The power and control that Guineans had over their own destinies astounded Hamer. She observed intently some relatively mundane activities that most Americans might have taken for granted, and her mind was on their larger significance for racial oppression. I saw black men flying the airplanes, driving buses, sitting behind the big desk in the bank, and just doing everything that I was used to seeing white people do. Most uplifting for Hamer was the sight of a black flight attendant. I saw for the first time in my life a black stewardess walking through the plane, and that was quite an inspiration for me. Hamer linked herself as a black woman to the daily lives of the Guinean women. Let's pause there. That was a mouthful. Okay, so I do like to read these books straight through, but if you're new here, or if you're returning and you know, I like to give my own commentary and delve into some topics and have some conversations because this is powerful. It's great to read, but it's even better to internalize what's being said and what's going on. That's important. This amazing woman, the civil rights leader, grew up as a sharecropper, grandmother formerly enslaved, is now in another country for the first time, in Africa at that, and seeing herself as a black woman for real. Like, she knows she back home fighting for just basic living rights as a black person, but to see black people being able to be in a functioning society, doing all the things that white people are allowed to do and black people are kept away from doing, she was able to formulate an identity. That's powerful. And it's sad. It's sad that it took that, but that's also why it's important to travel and to see other places and to be able to just see how things differ. Because like she's saying, like some things that they're doing, just life can just look different in different places. You got to get out of your city, your hometown, your home state, and see some things. And if you can't, we got the World Wide Web. There's places you could just try to immerse yourself in an experience just to learn something different about somewhere else. That's amazing. The way everybody talks to us. Yeah, and then you're told that, the media and what the oppressors are teaching you about Africans being savages and stupid. No, they're living off the land. They're technologically advanced. Like, there's balance in Africa. What are you talking about? She was really impressed by the stewardess. So Hamer linked herself as a black woman to the daily lives of the Guinean women. One thing I looked at so much was the African women. They were so graceful and so poised. She observed carefully their physical presentation and customs, their headdresses, and their manner of carrying water. She recognized an immediate connection to the women of the Mississippi Delta, including herself. It was so similar to my own families because it's very seldom that anybody see me without something tied on my head. Most of the African people wear their heads tied up. My mother would do the same thing. She would put something on her head and have 2 pails in one hand, a pail on her head, and could go for miles and wouldn't drop them. Her favorite childhood activities also came to mind as she observed the Guineans. A lot of things they do over there I've done as a child. Little common things, like they boil peanuts with salt like they'll boil peanuts with salt when they're real green. It just looked like my life coming all over again to me. Similarly, the music resonated with familiarity, like some of the songs. I couldn't translate their language, but it was the tune of some old songs I used to hear my grandmother sing. It was just so close to my family that I cried. Apart from giving meaning to her own cultural work habits and other practices, Hamer's careful observation of African women echoed related themes of womanhood, work, sex, and beauty in her own life. Hamer shared a great deal with the Guinean women. She, too, was a black woman for whom the definition of womanhood was closely tied to a domestic role, among other things. In addition, Hamer saw something in their physical presentation that she truly admired. They reminded her of her own mother and grandmother. A similar impression was implied in Hamer's recollection of the black stewardesses in an era when the emphasis was still on their physical presentation. What was it about their walking through the plane that left Hamer inspired? Did Hamer see them as beautiful, as younger and appealing? If this was the case, this is an unusual and particularly noteworthy recollection for Hamer, because sex and beauty appear here unassociated with violence in contrast to their appearance in other places in Hamer's autobiographical account. Hamer was overwhelmed by the connection she was making to her past and present. Mostly she was touched by her perception of historical disruption. It got to me. I cried over there. If I'm living here, I just might have some people there. I probably got relatives right now in Africa, but we'll never know each other because we've been separated. I'll never know them, and they'll never know me. Hamer, a noted wordsmith herself, observed, and they can't say that black people can't be intelligent. I met one child there, 11 years old, speaking 3 languages. He could speak English, French, and Malink. I don't know if it's Malink or Malinke, but Malinke. Let me look that up. Malink. Speaking my language actually better than I could. Even the differences in time, space, and language, she felt a deep connection with her. Wait a minute. Hold on. Even with the differences in time, space, and language, she felt a deep connection with her, those she met. I felt, that's what it said, with her, those she met. I felt a closeness in Africa. I couldn't speak the French, and a lot of them couldn't speak English, but the comparison between my family and them was unbelievable. 2 people that far apart and have so many things the same way. But through the joy and sadness, Hamer also found the time and mood to get angry and indignant, as she later recounted. I wasn't in getting more than a couple of hours before President Toure came to see us, and I just compared my feelings. I tried so hard so many times to see the president in this country, and I wasn't given that chance. But the president over there cared enough to visit us. He invited us to his place, and that was the first time I'd ever had a chance to go in a palace. I just thought it was great to see African people so kind. It was so vice versa what I'd heard that I couldn't hardly believe it. The group returned to the United States the first week in October after receiving an urgent phone call from Ivan Donaldson and Betty Garment in Atlanta. Cortland Cox had called an emergency staff meeting for October 10th. It turned out that the staff meeting that signaled a very... hold on. Thought I had to sneeze. It turned out to be a staff meeting that signaled a very painful and confusing transition that SNCC was about to undergo. Meanwhile, Hamer began work on another challenge. Ooh, there you go. Ooh. Alright, what's about to happen? In January 1965, now we might part two this. This is a kind of thick chapter, so sometimes I don't get through the whole chapter, but we'll see. We'll try. In January 1965, Fannie Lou Hamer re-entered the national political scene in another effort to strip the lily-white traditional Democratic Party of its power, initially joining her in a congressional challenge where MFDP candidates, MFDP stands for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which is what Fannie Lou was part of. Initially joining her in a congressional challenge were MFDP candidates Aaron Henry, Annie Devine, Victoria Jackson Gray, and Harold Ruby. Aaron Henry, former chairman of the MFDP delegation, opposed Senator John Census, but he later withdrew. Gray, an MFDP National Committee woman and the owner of a cosmetic business, opposed Representative William Colmer of the 5th Congressional District. Annie Devine challenged Arthur Winstead of the 4th District, and Harold Ruby, an active Lead County MFDP member, faced Representative Thomas Abernathy of the 1st Congressional District. Hamer continued for bid for the 2nd Congressional District seat, won by Representative Jamie Whitten. Before their congressional challenges, Hamer, Henry, and Devine attempted to place their names on the November 1964 ballot to run against the regular Democratic candidates, but the Mississippi State Election Commission refused to allow them because in the spring they had already participated in the Democratic Party as regular Democratic Party candidates and lost. Mississippi required that they now support the Democratic victors of the primary. Hamer and her MFDP candidates then decided to enter the fall election as independents as official candidates for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and so they began soliciting signatures for a petition drive. They submitted their petitions to Secretary of State Herbert Ladner, who directed them to turn the signatures over for verification by circuit registrars. Even though the MFDP candidates claimed they collected well over the required number of signatures for their petition, the State Election Commission, on the basis of the circuit registrar's count, argued that they did not have enough. MFDP discovered later that election officials threw away many of its petitions. Also, the Election Commission charged that the MFDP candidates were ineligible anyway because they had not paid 2 poll taxes. This, of course, had been outlawed by the 24th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The MFDP then decided to hold a mock election in fall 1964. The disputed Election Commission decisions and the results of the MFDP mock election provided the imperatives for the 1965 Congressional Challenge. Termed the Freedom Vote, the mock election was statewide for President and Congress. Unlike the official state elections, it was open to all races. Throughout the South, polling places were set up in places where black people spent much of their time, in churches and community centers. The Freedom Vote results were the opposite of the vote returned from the traditional Democratic Party's primary held in the spring. The mock election proved overwhelmingly that white politicians were ignoring the voices of Mississippi's eligible black electorate by not giving them a chance to register. Mississippi politicians had argued that low black registration figures were the result of apathy and ignorance. Blacks gave unanimous support to the MFDP candidates. Aaron Henry received 61,400 votes to Senator John C. Stein's 139 votes. Victoria Gray trounced Representative William Colmer by 10,138 votes. Annie Devine was victorious over Arthur Winstead, 6,000 votes to 4, and Hamer easily defeated Representative Jamie Whitten, 33,009 votes to 59. In addition to giving disenfranchised people an opportunity to prove their desire to participate in a formal political process, the Freedom Vote provided much grassroots organizing experience for running political campaigns. According to Betty Garman, an MFDP supporter and SNCC's Northern Coordinator, Freedom Vote participants gained valuable experience from organizing rallies to writing speeches, from debating political issues to using sound trucks, plastering the community with posters and bumper strips. The Freedom Vote election results made the congressional challenge of 1965 inevitable. After all, from its inception, Hamer and the MFDP had planned to use the results to further the party's national challenge. Devine, Gray, and Hamer took the lead in issuing the challenge when the 97th Congress convened in January 1965. The three women and their counsel attempted to unseat Mississippi representatives to Congress by arguing that the representatives-elect had won the election as a consequence of discriminatory voting practices. The MFDP began planning the challenge shortly after the Atlantic City Democratic Convention and the 1964 presidential election. On November 28, 1964, the MFDP called a meeting at its Washington, D.C. headquarters for its supporters and any other concerned individuals and organizations. At this meeting, the MFDP decided that the challenge would involve a legal approach and political action. Its political approach involved gaining Northern support for the party's Fairness Resolution, which held that no person claiming contested seats shall be allowed to take the oath until this contest or challenge is decided by the House. The legal approach involved challenging the results of the November 3rd Mississippi congressional election on the three grounds. First, the MFDP charged that the elections violated rights guaranteed to blacks in the 14th and 15th Amendments. Second, the party charged that the election violated the constitutional provision, Article 1, Section 2, that required that members of the House of Representatives be elected by all the people. Third, the MFDP charged that the state violated the provisions of the Compact of 1870, which allowed Mississippi readmission to the Union under several conditions. One condition provided that the Constitution of Mississippi shall never be so amended or changed as to deprive any citizens or class of citizens of the United States of the right to vote who are entitled to vote by the Constitution herein recognized. So let's pause there. They did a mock election after having all this drama and trauma and trying to just get to go vote. So people are winning and being put in position that are not looking out for people like me. So because we weren't able to get in, we did a mock election. And the people that came out and voted, we would have won based on just them alone. But because y'all be BSing us on letting us register and come out and vote and all kind of stuff, we can't put the numbers in. So now they coming back with the facts too. Here are 3 reasons why we are challenging y'all, and we about to get up in this thing. I love it. All right, let's finish up. I love it. So along with the other challengers, Hamer began her work by sending a form letter to friends of SNCC soliciting financial and political support for the challenge. In keeping with her other mobilizing efforts, Hamer used an example of violence against civil rights workers as justification for the urgent need for this latest challenge. She cited the well-publicized murder of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi during the summer of 1964. She argued that the killing of Andrew Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, and James Chaney was ample proof of the lawlessness that reigned in Mississippi, especially in response to the movement. She called on the Friends of SNCC to recognize the enormous need for justice in her home state and to join her in the challenge to unseat the racists who perpetuated and allowed such conditions to exist. She closed with a request for financing of the Freedom Democrats and the challenge. She called on citizens to do all you can in getting your congressmen and congresswomen to support the Fairness Resolution and having these racists unseated. She signed the letter, "Yours for Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, Member of Congress, 2nd District of Mississippi." Hamer's work on the challenge began the same way in which she had intensified her voter registration work after the 1963 Winona beating. She went on a whirlwind national tour in pursuit of publicity and financial and moral support. Hamer's forte was raising money for the movement's individual battles, and this required a great deal of travel and speaking, which must have seemed endless in the case of her congressional challenge responsibilities. By December 1964, she set up a temporary residence in Washington, D.C., along with her co-challengers Annie Devine and Victoria Gray. The women found it easier to lobby legislators on a daily basis if they lived in the area. So they secured an apartment and returned to D.C. after each fundraising tour. On December 4, 1964, the notice of the challenge was served to the clerk of the House. The Mississippi congressmen who were being challenged did not answer the charges until January 4, 1965, a whole 30 days later. December 4th is when the challenge went out. They didn't respond until January 4th. When the Congress decided, the Mississippi congressmen who were being challenged did not answer the charges until January 4th, 1965, when the Congress decided to vote on whether to seat them while the challenge was being resolved. During the month of December, the MFDP and its attorneys organized support groups which put pressure on various congressmen and raised funds for the party. The attorneys also used this time for preparing briefs, all of which centered around the notion of illegal representation. For example, Hamer's brief stated that she was the only one who represented the 2nd Congressional District of Mississippi in the House of Representatives because the Freedom Vote was more representative of the democratic process than was the regular party's election, since it was open to all Mississippians of voting age. Because Hamer defeated her opponent decisively in the Freedom Vote, the brief concluded that Hamer deserved the seat of her opponent, Jamie Whitten. On January 4, 1965, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party began collecting evidence for its case. In accordance with federal law, the party had the next 40 days in which to accomplish this. The Freedom Democrats enlisted the aid of numerous lawyers from around the country. On this same day, the congressmen on Capitol Hill voted to swear in the white Mississippi representatives-elect and let them take their seats while the challenge was being considered. Meanwhile, approximately 600 members of the MFDP held a 2-hour silent march in front of the House of Representatives just as the swearing-in ceremonies were beginning. Devine, Gray, and Hamer made an unsuccessful attempt to enter the floor as election contestants. However, one member of the American Nazi Party did manage to make his way into the House chamber before a policeman escorted him out. He burst into the House chamber in minstrel clothes, his face painted black, shouting, "I want to see what the Mississippi delegation looks like." Later, Hamer observed in disgust, how could 12 policemen block us but could not see that man in the black face? The notification of the challenge sent to the House and the subsequent seating of the 5 white representatives marked the first stage of the congressional challenge. Despite this first concession to the challenges, the MFDP remained optimistic about the chances of bringing about justice. In a statement released after the House made its decision, the Mississippi Freedom Democrats claimed that once they presented the evidence of intimidation, bombings, and other forms of terrorism used to keep Negroes in Mississippi from voting, Congress and the entire nation would have no choice but to remove those Mississippi congressmen who were undemocratically elected. Let's pause here, because it's like these white folks trying to play in people's face. Like, y'all know y'all out there doing all these bombings and killings, and then they making little comments about, oh, well, yeah, y'all out of ignorance or whatever, y'all not coming to vote. Y'all make it hard on us. Y'all have literacy tests. Y'all doing all kind of illegal, unconstitutional stuff to keep us from voting. So when we do our own mock vote and come back with the numbers and try to get the seats, y'all want to play a game. Oh, well, y'all got to find proof and bring this evidence. We don't have time to play games with these people. That's why I love that she was so enamored by the experience she had in Guinea, in Africa, because what? You just don't even need to be a part of this foolishness. Despite the first concession of the challenges, the MFDP remained optimistic about the chances of bringing about justice. In a statement released after the House made its decision, the Mississippi Freedom Democrats claimed that once they presented the evidence of intimidation bombings and other forms of terrorism used to keep Negroes in Mississippi from voting, Congress and the entire nation would have no choice but to remove those Mississippi congressmen who were undemocratically elected. As if the experience at the 1964 Democratic Convention were forgotten, the MFDP seemed to rediscover its trust in the federal government as ultimate protector and provider of justice. Let me write that down. The 1964 Democratic Convention. I need to watch some videos on that later. Fannie went off that day. She told a big part of her story and some tragedy she had been through and why social and civil rights is necessary. So as if the experience of the 1964 Democratic Convention were forgotten, the MFDP seemed to rediscover its trust in the federal government as ultimate protector and provider of justice. A great deal was required to extinguish its die-hard faith in federal intervention. More than simple political naivety, this hope appeared to be a logical recourse around which to plan civil rights strategies. Hamer, believing that some American legislatures would sooner or later stand up for justice, directed the party to continue the challenge before the appropriate committee. Included in the first stage challenge activities was an effort to get Mississippi state officials to respond to the MFDP's claim of election discrimination. On January 22nd, 1965, and Hamer and the MFDP ordered Governor Paul Johnson, Attorney General Joe T. Patterson, Colonel T.B. Birdsong, head of the State Highway Patrol, and Earl Johnston, director of the State Sovereignty Commission, to be subpoenaed to answer a series of questions in response to the MFDP challenge. Okay, we need results. We're not just sending out stuff in the center and waiting until June to hear back. Let's get on the good foot. During these initial stages of the challenge, Hamer's health began troubling her. She was extremely fatigued, according to letters written by Betty Garman. In a response to the first request for Hamer to speak, which came from the Davis, California Friends of SNCC, Garman pointed out that Fannie Lou Hamer was desperately in need of rest. Part of the problem in contacting her for a speaking engagement is that she needs a rest rather badly, and some arrangements are being made for her whole family to have some vacation. But before such a vacation could be taken, Hamer had to be hospitalized for exhaustion. In a subsequent letter in response to a speaking request from the same group in Davis, Garman indicated that Mrs. Hamer is pretty ill and is resting in a New York hospital till she gets a little better, mostly exhaustion. So she can't come to Davis for a talk. No doubt her fatigue was the result of a demanding, hectic schedule which often had her too busy to answer speaking requests herself. But less than a month later, Hamer was up and at it again, traveling constantly between Louisville and Washington, D.C. throughout early 1965. She was hard to keep up with, even for SNCC coordinators like Garman. In a letter responding to another speaking request, this one from the California State Association of Colored Women's Clubs in San Jose, California, Garman noted, "I have no idea at all what Mrs. Hamer's schedule might be, and thus suggest that you write to her directly at the following two addresses. Send a letter to each place, and she is back and forth between the two cities when she is not speaking in other areas." Eventually, Hamer went on to honor her numerous speaking engagements from Northern California, and this resulted in an increase to MFDP's coffers, although not a hefty one. On April 3, 1965, Fred Hirsch mailed $500 to Betty Garman for MFDP because of Hamer's participation in some organized activities in San Jose, California, the nature of which was not stated in the letter. Hirsch noted that Hamer's involvement was key to the success of their program. In a message typed in nearly all uppercase letters, apparently for emphasis, Hirsch wrote, "We put on a program which would not have stood up on its own until Mrs. Hamer consented to come down here and add her own participation. We were able to make the thing go because of her." While in California, Hamer also attended an MFDP benefit and Hamer party sponsored by Marin Friends of SNCC, which brought in only $80.21. It was such hard work for so little return, financially at least. The second stage of the challenge began with the taking of depositions during the allotted 40-day period. The MFDP collected depositions from over 600 witnesses. Among those witnesses were several people who had considerable information about Mississippi, but who were no longer residents of the state. Dang. Despite possible reprisal and violence, many witnesses came forth and told stories about how they were denied an opportunity to register. Also, the MFDP, with the aid of its 100 lawyers, took information on the state's public officials and other members of the white community. Many of these witnesses were asked general questions about voter registration practices and specific questions about efforts made to prevent blacks from voting. On February 13th, the disposition taking was over, and the second stage of the challenge had come to a close. On May 17th, the third stage of the congressional challenge began with the filing of the 600 dispositions collected by the MFDP. Party members were steadfastly at work holding a major conference and a series of regional meetings in an effort to plan a Freedom Summer 1965 modeled after the 1964 campaign. As the House continued the challenge proceedings and the Voting Rights Act worked its way to Lyndon Johnson's death that spring, Hamer continued her traveling and fundraising. In preparation for the final stage of the congressional challenge, she and the MFDP had set their sights on organizing something like the 1963 March on Washington in August. According to a SNCC letter, Hamer had plans to speak sometime in August in Denver on behalf of the MFDP in order to raise enough money to transport Mississippians to Washington at the end of the month for an all-out lobbying effort. Hamer's efforts took her all over the West, including up and down the coast. In early August, Hamer visited Seattle again. As a result of her efforts, she collected $325 and forwarded it to Washington, D.C. to MFDP headquarters. The fourth and final stage of the challenge included the filing of briefs by both sides beginning on July 31, 1965. In their briefs, the white Mississippi congressmen made no effort to respond to specific charges made by the MFDP. Their one basic point was that the challenge should not be discussed since challengers were not official candidates and this made them ineligible contestants. The challenge was not a valid one because it was presented by non-challengers. In their briefs, they completely disregarded the fact that the MFDP candidates had made several attempts to get on the traditional Democratic Party's November ballot months before. Like, stop playing with them. On September 15, 1965, the Subcommittee on Elections and Privileges presented its final report on the challenge to the House Committee on Administration, recommending that the challenge be dismissed. The parent committee lent support to the resolution, which was then sent to the House floor. Okay, let me back up. On September 15, 1965, so in July July 31st is when they sent their brief. So July, August, September. So 2 months later, the Subcommittee on Elections and Privileges presented its final report on the challenge to the House Committee on Administration, recommending that the challenge be dismissed. The parent committee lent support to the resolution, which was then sent to the House floor. On September 17th, the House acted in accordance with the resolution and by a 228 to 143 vote dismissed the challenge. However, before the House could do so, Hamer and her two colleagues placed their imprint on another page of history. As a part of a sympathetic gesture, the Speaker of the House insisted that the challengers take a seat on the House floor while the vote was taken. This made them the first black women to sit on the floor of Congress, although Hamer, Devine, and Gray were once again disappointed and disillusioned. They found little consolation in this sympathetic gesture. After the challenge, Gray stated, "Until the time comes that they, House members, are ready to argue the Constitution instead of technicalities, the Constitution will not be real to me or to hundreds of thousands of other people." Hamer responded to the defeat by reaffirming her commitment to making justice a reality for black people someday. "I'm one of the black people of America. My grandmother was a slave. With God's help, without violence, I'll keep on fighting until the Constitution means more than a piece of paper." Well, good luck, Fannie. Let me see how many more pages. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I want to pause there. Yeah, I think I'm going to pause here. We'll come back. I'm on page 114, chapter 6. Yeah. Thank y'all for tuning in. We'll be back with chapter 6, part 2, in some other time. I hope y'all have a great rest of y'all day.